Before I can remember, my life was consumed by the world of Thomas the Tank Engine. I watched the CDs dozens and dozens of times. I loved every character for one reason or another, and I bought as much merchandise as I could, all for the sole purpose of immersing myself completely in this world that I had fallen so deeply in love with. When I eventually found myself on the side of the internet where fellow enjoyers of the series were sharing their own stories online, I could then experience and enjoy even more of this fantastical world. On top of this, I would read comments or watch videos of people sharing how they felt about the show or books or whatever, discovering a whole network of people who would discuss or create based on this constantly developing franchise. When the show reached a return to form in the fan-renowned Brenner era, which brought with it a revitalization of the original spirit of the series, fans rejoiced knowing that with the new life Andrew Brenner had brought with him, they would feel recognized and rewarded when several fan-favorite characters like Duck and Oliver made their triumphant returns. Characters who had been all but forgotten when the franchise was bought by Hit Entertainment in the early 2000s in an effort that sought to rebrand the series by simplifying many aspects, including a more central focus on a main cast instead of the expansive ensemble that laid the foundation for Wilbert Awdry's original world. This change in direction gave many fans hope that other favorites would soon be returning to the show and would get a new appreciation in the spotlight they had been robbed of for so many years. Because of the expansive world created and detailed by Wilbert Awdry, the original author of the Railway series, there were so many characters the fans could imagine making their return to the silver screen. One such character that came up time and time again in all of the speculation was BoCo the Diesel Engine. A rather minor character in the grand scheme of things, but was nonetheless highly anticipated to somehow debut in the contemporary CGI era of the show. But alas, as the Brenner era of the show went on, and Mattel's push for another new direction went forward, the chance at seeing this character return seemed to disappear from view. There are still many fan works out there imagining what BoCo would have looked like in CGI, from simple edits to full-on animated scratch builds for him. This isn't even mentioning the plethora of works out there that focus or at least include BoCo prominently using their own headcanons or building off of the original material. This is of course not unheard of in the Thomas fandom, as many creators have taken it upon themselves to repurpose or make the best of characters that were thrown to the wayside during the infamous dark era of the show, or otherwise. But seeing BoCo keep coming up in discussions and make innumerable appearances in the community left me bewildered for so many years. I kept asking myself the question, why is everyone so enamored by BoCo? What is everyone seeing in this character that I am not? Since, mind you, BoCo was not just a minor character in the series, book or show, but I mean a very minor character, touting only several appearances across the span of either series. I started writing this video on these simple questions with the goal to understand one very minor character in a very large franchise. But as I went on, I found there were many more layers to this question that can tell us about ourselves, of fiction, and especially of our relationships to fictional worlds. So for this video, I'm going to look at the deeper meaning of BoCo as a character and as a symbol. So let's start with the most fundamental question to this discussion. Who is BoCo? Well, let's discuss what we know about him. BoCo is a
Metropolitan Vickers Diesel Electric Type 2.
Who was built for British Railways in 1958 and worked in Barrow-in-Furness until he found himself on Sodor soil in 1965, where he was soon after purchased by Sir Topham Hatt. All of this happens off screen, of course, but we first meet BoCo in the episode The Diesel. His introduction takes place in Season 2, the season that marks many things like new characters and new themes/elements. One such theme was diesel modernization, that debuted in the infamous Duck and the Diesel saga, a multi-part story that introduced us to the aptly named Diesel, very creative work there, who, upon first meeting Duck, boasts about the revolutionary diesel age. In this saga, we are faced with the idea that diesels are a threat to our beloved steam-powered friends, through Diesel's lies and schemes, and can be problematic and selfish, like we see later on in the season with Daisy. In BoCo's episode, we follow Bill and Ben as the protagonists, who find their trucks missing and presumed stolen by a diesel. They then bravely seek out BoCo and initially villainize him, leading us to believe that this is yet another Duck and the Diesel situation. After some shenanigans, we see the characters argue until Edward intervenes and tells all. In the end, we are shown this is actually an inversion of Duck and Diesel's conflict, where Bill and Ben are the ones who instigated the conflict and BoCo was innocent the whole time. The episode serves as a good subversion of what we have been led to believe so far in this season about Diesel kind. what this resolution shows is not only is it wrong to make assumptions, but a character who is the exception to what we were led to believe diesels are. For BoCo's next major appearance, which really isn't all that major in terms of plot, we shall turn to Edward's exploit. BoCo's role is really rather minor and brief, but is nonetheless incredibly important. When the three big engines are speaking poorly of Edward pretty much to his face, he and Duck are the ones who quickly come to his defense while he is unable to speak for himself. What I find crucial to this scene is that it's Duck and BoCo supporting Edward. BoCo's part here could have gone to plenty of other characters, and while the argument could be made, well, he's just another mainline engine, so it's only natural for him to be there. Donald and Douglas could have easily filled this role as well, since they show up almost everywhere on the island. But this role was given to BoCo, who doesn't hesitate to fight back against the other big engines. With this in mind, we should talk about the big green rectangular elephant in the room. BoCo is a diesel. Yes, obviously, you say. I mean, didn't we just talk about this? And while his friendship to Edward is established and another good reason why he is here, he's not just saying these things as a friend, but out of respect for a fellow engine. So we have to address the greater thematic relevance this serves. In a season that saw the introduction of several diesel characters, 2 or 3 of them being the crux of the conflicts in their stories, here we have BoCo adamantly standing up for his friend Edward despite their aesthetic differences, simply because he cannot stand for such disrespect. While there's no real mention of BoCo being a diesel here, what's so special about this scene for him is that he himself doesn't care about that. While we can admire BoCo for his selflessness and loyalty, what really informs BoCo's significance to this series is his context. He is not just another friend to talk to around the shed's turntable at night, he is another layer of depth added to the world of the seemingly simple stories of Thomas. In his existence alone, he makes the world of Sodor more complex by defying what we come to expect of diesel characters and challenge our wholehearted sympathies towards steam engines by having us grow fond of a diesel who becomes one of the family. Of our family. Now at this point I have to be honest with you all. I know I've been doing a lot of praising of BoCo and his character despite his minor appearances, and while this video is still going to be about discovering why this character is significant, I have to admit I didn't always see it that way. I felt it important to contextualize this video with the many fans who wanted to see BoCo return because it set up the longing the community had developed for this character. But when I laid out my questions toward these sentiments, I neglected to mention the fact that they originally came from a place of contrarianism. If you're one of maybe 3 people in the world who knew of this channel way back when, before I completely rebooted it, you might remember I used to do little videos where I would record myself talking for several minutes about a given character from Thomas without a script and minimal editing. Truly dark times, and hopefully no one actually remembers. But there was one video I did about BoCo where I put my foot down and argued that he had become somewhat overrated. He had hardly any appearances in either the books or the show, and he has never had any lead roles. To top it all off, if you look at his character on paper, to the average Joe, he's just an Edward clone. He keeps the twins in check, he's kind, and he's wise. To me, all this outcrying that he should be brought back confused me because there seemed to be no good reason for it, other than he used to be in the show. And to be fair, if you look hard enough, you'll find fans who would imagine all sorts of even less significant characters being brought back, like Billy. So in my mind, it was the same rose-tinted glasses that kept fans bitter towards the new stuff because it didn't have all of the old stuff. But that was then. We're in a completely new era of Thomas the Tank Engine now. An era that finds the franchise falling deeper and deeper into obscurity, mostly due to the poor handling of its current owners. It's hard enough to find an actual fan of the show walking on the streets who can say more than, "Oh, I remember that show," let alone someone who enjoys discussing it at length, unless you're one of the few here online. All this to say that given this drought of official media to satisfy us fans of the franchise, I find myself reflecting on the various aspects of it and exploring new avenues in which to uncover new ways to appreciate what I already dearly love. I find BoCo is one of these avenues I wish to journey down. It is also why I felt I needed to confess why I used to feel so bitter towards him. Because after all these years of enjoying Thomas in so many ways, I'm glad I can come back and construct something new out of what I had previously took little notice of before. So let's put my former self's contention to rest here and now. BoCo does serve as a sort of Edward equivalent for diesels, and that's not a bad thing. It helps to balance the cast from leaning too heavily into the author's own bias towards his fondness of the steam-powered age. As we saw in the Diesel and Edward's exploit, BoCo is very kind, with no apparent vices to speak of, which heavily contrasts with the kind of Diesel representation his debut is sandwiched between, that being the selfish and conceited Daisy, and rebellious and overconfident Mavis. These two may stand out more than BoCo due to their dynamic personalities, but I believe that doesn't diminish the imprint he still leaves in the portrait of Sodor's residence. We can see how his value on the island is cemented by the rapport he gains with others like Edward, Duck, Donald, Douglas, and even Gordon,
BoCo!
All of whom, except for Edward, are especially meaningful bonds because of their previous disdain for diesels in the first place. If BoCo can supersede a steam engine's fear of dieselization with kindness, then what more need I say to convince you he has had a great impact despite his minor status? Whatever your answer may be, say more I shall, because I can't end the discussion there. No, for me, I felt BoCo's value deserved greater research to be better comprehended. But what angle should I come at this topic with? How can I apply BoCo to the real world, or vice versa? I considered looking at diversity, since BoCo represented the first of his kind in expanding the concepts of friendship and kindness to a new element in the stories. I considered a few other angles, like his obscurity, but none really struck me. That is, until I considered what has been the most defining attribute we've talked about numerous times already. BoCo is a minor character. Yes! It's so obvious. I mean, I've already said it a million times, so what? Well, when I started looking up articles that had to do with minor characters in fiction, I formed this question. Why are minor characters important? In my venture to understand what a minor character is and how that can be applied to our friend BoCo, I came across one article that outlined an in-depth explanation of minor characters in literature that really opened my eyes. David Galef's book, A Study of Flat and Minor Characters, defines and discusses the roles each fulfills in fiction and the significance they both have. While reading this, I considered the meanings of the flat character and the minor character and had to contemplate what they each meant for this discussion. I now had to ask myself, was BoCo a minor character, or was he actually just a flat one? At this point then, it would only be prudent to make the distinction between what a minor and flat character are in terms of what they mean to us as the audience, and how they contribute to the text itself. For Galef, the difference is quite clear. Minor characters in their paucity of detail invite the reader's elaboration. Flat characters, though lacking in depth, are finished creations, possessing what one might call contextual closure. A successful minor character may invite curiosity, but a well-drawn flat character provokes no further probing. In essence, a minor character is an entire character that we just don't see the full image of, whereas a flat character is basically a what you see is what you get. Flat characters don't have any nuance, really, or any notable development, which makes characters like BoCo seem like a possible candidate for that category. So is BoCo a flat character if he doesn't have any kind of journey or development over time that we see? We never really get any time to look into his perspective at all, so how can we say we really understand him? This also brings into question if he really has any other sides to him. According to Galef, flat characters really only serve the stories they're in for one purpose, and at least one scene. And considering BoCo only appears in a few scenes, and usually, if not always, once per story, it would stand to reason that BoCo comes across as merely subservient to the story, rather than an individual character who has goals or the potential for his own narrative in the first place. Is there truly any depth to this character that goes beyond his ability to show that not all diesels are bad? Have I made this video in vain, and I've just been grasping at straws all this time just to have something to talk about? Hopefully, if you've stayed with me this long, I hope I can convince you this is all worth it, since despite what constitutes the flat character and the relatively minimal characterization we are given for BoCo compared to everyone else, I don't believe BoCo is at all a flat character. I would like to refute the idea that BoCo is a flat character by expanding on how Galef describes minor characters in the grander scheme, and then apply this to our case. We can separate BoCo from a flat character by the merit that it does not just fulfill one purpose. BoCo may not have a standout trait like pulling the express or mail, but is perfectly at home on Edward's branch line, and with Edward he serves as an authority figure to Bill and Ben. He is also a voice of reason that will oppose the big engines, as we discussed in Edward's exploit. Plus, he is a friend/confidant for others like Duck or Edward, to name but some of those he helps. These all come together to create the image of an overall supporting cast member who may not enjoy the lead role of any stories, but will show up to support or set straight the other characters. And while he may not exude any exaggerated or loud qualities like James or Gordon, I believe he is still a welcome addition to the family for the kindness and rationality he offers. Further, I'd like to go back to when Galef said minor characters invite reader elaboration and curiosity, as I found that invitation towards the audience is the main appeal of minor characters in fiction, generally speaking. If we look at books or any sort of media through the lens of Wolfgang Iser, we can view the entire text as a series of gaps that the reader must fill in. This can be due to many things, but the main one is because the sides we see and don't see in stories come down to the choices an author makes in magnifying or ignoring certain elements due to a story's limited space. So it is up to us, the reader, to interpret or imagine some of the elements that are left ambiguous to us. Like when we are given a general description of a character in a book that outlines certain key traits, but it's not like you have an actual drawing there to tell you exactly what all those traits put together look like. It makes it really fun to see how people draw their favorite characters in books, because it can still take what is given to you in that description and look completely different than how you imagined it in your head. This theory, I think, also applies to the personality of these minor characters as well, since just as you can widely interpret what an author means when describing the shape of someone's eye, you can just as easily have a field day interpreting the myriad of decisions that that character had made in their life before appearing in the story you're reading. While protagonists may leave room for the reader to interpret and analyze their decisions and entire being, in the hypothetical meeting ground between the reader and the text, minor characters simply require more of the reader than full portraits do. Minor characters are like playthings for the audience to explore with their imagination, where main characters like Thomas or Edward have characteristics that are more set in stone, such as being cheeky or being experienced, as well as histories that are clearly established in the show or in other media. Characters like Arthur or Murdoch, who are other fan favorites, leave a lot for fans to insert as they see fit, since they go relatively unexplored in the main series, while still getting a chance to show some distinct qualities for the fans to latch onto. This is something I talked about at length in my James video, and we'll go over it again later in this one, but a character's malleability can make them so appealing, especially when there are intriguing enough building blocks to work from. The main point I want to make here is that minor characters have some kind of hook to them that make us want to explore them deeper. However, exploring these characters takes effort from the audience in the first place. As Norman Holland notes, identification with the literary character is a complicated mixture of projection and introjection, of taking in from the character certain drives and defenses that are really objectively out there, and of putting into him feelings that are really our own. I'd like to apply this to our discussion of flat characters as well, at least the first part, about taking on certain qualities from them. If we look at Diesel in the classic series as a flat character, someone who is only there to fulfill one purpose and lacks any sort of depth, I think the appeal we can find in this character is that he is wholeheartedly a devious antagonist, and whenever we see him we know what to expect, and that can be just as satisfying in a way. It's why I believe everyone really enjoyed Jack Horner in the last Puss in Boots movie, because he's straightforward and we can enjoy that attribute to a villain character or the like. Evidently, it is not inherently an issue to have flat characters in a story, for in predictability and flatness lie a certain comfortable assurance. And this applies to minor characters as well, who might have more layers but do not usually hold the spotlight. In the brevity of minor figures lies the guarantee that one will not be closeted with any unpleasantness for too long. Minor and flat figures then offer an easy hold for identification, an attraction that promises to be stable. With the world of Thomas the Tank Engine, there are so many colorful characters to cling to, and each will have some time in the spotlight, even if it's brief. With such a diverse cast and time spread between so many of them, some would think that the series would suffer from lack of focus. But if you look at these minor characters, I would say that's far from the truth. Many fans can attest to Thomas being a comfort show. That comes from the familiar cast we attach ourselves to. The fact that before the show was ever conceived, Wilbert Awdry called his books the Railway series tells us a lot about what matters the most in Awdry's eyes. The constant rotation of protagonists in each story tells us that this series follows a community, rather than one individual who is intrinsically more important than the rest. The extended ensemble we get to follow and fall in love with expands with every new book for the purpose of adding new perspectives that might not have been possible to explore with the ones we already know. The thing is, though, with characters like Oliver, for instance, who get several stories dedicated to them and then become a minor character for the most part, they add another color to the expansive expansive background of characters we know are always around to find. Even when we only get mentions of other characters, like when we hear BoCo needs to take the express when Gordon isn't feeling well, it adds to the assurance we have of his belonging in the cast. Decisions like this affirm to me that Audrey never saw any one character as the main character, and what he really wanted to do was give us the sense that this is really a working railway with constant moving parts and features. So what is gained through the depiction of flat and minor characters, Galef asks. Oddly enough, depth. A contrasting, shifting background against which major figures play out the drama of their lives. Each protagonist we follow in Audrey's stories is subsumed in a network of connections and histories. So even when characters like Big Mickey, who goes unnamed and who has never spoken before, gets just one line in a completely different era of the show, that kind of stuff matters to fans, because every part of this world matters. This doesn't just apply to Thomas, of course. There are many great minor characters in fiction. Heck, some of them are so great they get their own spin-offs because people enjoy them so much. I would say the reason the minor characters in Thomas mean so much to us is because they all have a reason for being there. The fact that they exist means someone put thought into their conception, whether that be Audrey, or Aldcroft, or Mitten, or Brenner. Even if we go back to looking at fan works, most original characters will be based off real-life engines, and the fun people have is working them into the continuity of the series to see how they can naturally implement them. I really like how Galef puts it here. Though the bold stroke of a protagonist may show the author's genius, or the evocative style reveal his way with words, the analysis of minor figures will inevitably reveal the painstaking construction of the work, how the author intends to get from alpha to omega, to what contrasts he has in his mind, or what thematic principles he is stressing. If we look at that last line about thematic principles, BoCo's character is meant to say a lot about the themes of dieselization as we discussed earlier, but I would also like to posit that he stresses the greater meaning of Audrey's work. And while there are many through lines one can find in the Railway series, appreciation for the old, good work ethic, etc., I believe one of the most important, and the one BoCo symbolizes, is community. BoCo's introduction tells us not to judge a book by its cover, as Bill and Ben learn after prejudging BoCo because he is a diesel, but find he's really nice. Likewise, a more humorous instance where Gordon is being teased by Bill and Ben, who jokingly say they're going to throw him into the sea, leaving Gordon genuinely fearing for his life, finds BoCo stepping in to save Gordon, at least that's what Gordon thinks.
BoCo, my dear engine!
While this scene is played for laughs, I think it shows how kind he is for trying to spare someone Bill and Ben's pranks, even if that someone wouldn't do the same for him. I think BoCo represents a kind of ideal for Audrey's world, similar to Edward, as both put kindness above everything else. For BoCo, it's doubly meaningful because this moment also proves that Gordon, someone who was so against diesels, can change his perspective, because for BoCo, it's not about steam or diesel, but being kind for the sake of it. BoCo represents the best of the Sodor community for his ability to stay true to good morals and his kindness to others. It is through characters like him that Sodor maintains its moral integrity, and its community is able to rely on each other. Speaking of community, I'd like this next part to be dedicated to this community and its connection to BoCo, since that was what started me down this rabbit hole in the first place. While it doesn't seem like BoCo matters much to the higher-ups at Mattel or the mainstream, he is still very important to the fans. Maybe not in the same way Thomas or Edward might be, but you don't have to go too deep into the Thomas fandom, I think, in order to spot him in the background at least. For this part, I finally want to tackle the question that has been prodding at my mind for so long. What does BoCo mean to the fandom? If you've watched my first 2 videos on this channel, you'll know that I would argue there are many factors for why people are so attached to this world. And one of those main reasons is the allure of escapism, transporting oneself to another world that can provide a safe haven from reality. This relationship the audience has watching another world take place in front of their eyes and developing a connection to it has come to be known as the parasocial relationship. The term was first coined by 2 sociologists, Richard Horton and David Woloch, who described the term complementary to normal life. It provides a social milieu in which the everyday assumptions and understandings of primary group interaction and sociability are demonstrated and reaffirmed. Of course, there is plenty of research and deep dives out there about the pros and cons to parasocial relationships, but for our cases, I'd like to forgo taking a stance just for now, simply so we can focus on why it's important for our purposes. I hope I've made it clear by now how deep a connection to the world of Sodor fans have made in their lifetimes. Because this relationship fans have with the show tells us why they can find so much comfort through it and why they want to explore it. As an escape, Soda does what any great fictional world does, and invites you to experience it all it has to offer. Derek, Gabriel, and Hugenberg and their research on parasocial relationships explored the idea that entering a fictional world via their favorite show can give a sense of belonging. This to me says that this feeling we use to connect with fictional worlds brings us comfort, and it can be just as hard to accept drastic and unfair change to that world, especially if we love them so dearly. In BoCo's case, he's an original Audrey character who starred in early stories of the show, and while mostly dwelled in the background, always felt like he belonged there, and was a friend to everyone, thus solidifying in us that he was part of our parasocial family. When a character like that is then lost to us, it hits us as what Eyal and Cohen call parasocial breakups. One example they used was when the beloved long-running show Friends ended. It was found it evoked the same emotions as something like an actual breakup, though less intense. This research was done for an adult show and likely looked at a predominantly adult audience, so when it comes to Thomas, there is obviously a much different demographic. I remember personally being a lot more sensitive to change as a kid, especially when it came to the shows I watched. I think it's also worth considering things seem to be a lot more heightened then as well. So I think if this same research was done for kids in a show they really loved, I would like to know how it might be different. While this hypothetical research probably wouldn't tell us that audience members would feel heartbroken over one minor character who showed up here and there, maybe, I would hypothesize that part of the reason we get so sad over our favorite show's ending has to do with never getting to see those characters again, major or minor. And so this is where I find myself talking about fan fiction again. At this point, you should probably just expect it. But I want to focus on one text that actually discusses fanfiction specifically about minor characters. In Jeremy M. Rosen's Minor Characters Have Their Day, the imaginary and actual politics of a contemporary genre, Rosen coins the genre name for this kind of work as minor character elaboration. To help clarify what that means, I think it's best we look at one of the examples they use, and the most relevant one now is Wicked.
That's my line.
Now at this point, I'm sure you're thinking, how did we get from BoCo from Thomas the Tank Engine to talking about Wicked the musical? And yes, that's a valid question. But hear me out. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on Wicked or anything, but the basic idea is that we reveal the story of Elphaba before she ever became the Wicked Witch of the West. It is really funny to realize that this world-renowned musical is basically just one big fanfiction. I mean, it was funny to me because I had never seen the thing until it recently came out, and never knew what happened only to find out it was like this. Rosen's point here is that texts like these seek to give voice to silenced characters. Since Elphaba is supposed to represent the outspoken in Winnie Holzman's book, divulging in the origin for her becoming evil rather than just being evil with no rhyme or reason like the original story. This isn't the only example Rosen gives, of course. There are many similar examples that are meant to recover silenced voices in history. Obviously, I'd like to say it before anyone gets on me in the comments. In this case, what these authors do is certainly on a much grander scale, but I think it's fair to say that there lies in these projects the same goal, to give acknowledgement to a subject that wasn't given its due. Clearly, writing a story about an obscure character in Thomas is way different from writing for, something important like feminism, but I think there is the same interest in exploring those characters. In this vein, we can liken BoCo and other forgotten characters to being silenced, to some degree, since their stories end abruptly and unceremoniously. In BoCo's case, being lost to time despite signifying so much in terms of Soder's history and community can be seen as a kind of injustice. I think you'll always get people who will say the book was better or the show wasn't the same after X left. There's no stopping that, but when a character is forgotten, that's a whole other level of pain for some fans. For BoCo, there's this double jeopardy to it, where not only does he get forgotten in the show, but it's just also lost to time when the show is taken under new management. It's this level of obscurity I don't know if I can apply to any other character. I mean, that I know of. Feel free to give some examples. I think this makes those who do know about him feel a little more special. Like when you have a fun fact that you only know and love telling people about. BoCo has that kind of obscurity to him that makes you feel like a really dedicated fan for being in that small group. It also gives him a kind of mystery that makes him like some elusive mythical creature. I mean, this is coming from someone who has treated this topic like some conspiracy I'm cracking the code to, so cut me some slack. While for now it may not seem like Mattel would be making any fan-driven dramatic shifts anytime soon, I'm glad I live in a time where that doesn't deter fans from continuing to make their own stories. The escapism Soder provides and vastness in its identities allow so much room for creative exploration, as any fan can latch onto the array of characters and connect with them while still having room to project project their own feelings. Thomas the Tank Engine has so much to offer in terms of lore, yet still follows Rosen's claim that not all characters have been created equal, but each has the potential to be a protagonist, because each is endowed with a distinctive individuality. As we talked about before, BoCo is not just an Edward clone, despite sharing some of the same core qualities, because he was created to fulfill a different purpose, and thus was given the potential to birth different stories. When you become so engrossed in the world of Thomas, it's easier to see each character as their own individual, and much easier to headcanon or write about them in novel scenarios. If we look back at Wicked as an example, there's no denying the limitless potential one minor character story has to be a great one. Making a story like that certainly takes a fine mixture of imbuing that character with one's own traits, as well as taking on the persona of said character. And still, it is in the conversion of a formerly minor character into a narrator/protagonist, one discovers an assertion of the unique subjectivity of every individual and a consequent insistence on the plurality of perspectives rather than any single truth. Fanfiction is this rather fascinating place people can go where they can find comfort in the worlds they adore and use that as a starting point for self-exploration, as well as new perspectives or concepts. Wicked's whole message is about the ostracized and disenfranchised fighting back against the system. Not to sound cheesy, but it is kind of an allegory for the whole point of the minor character elaboration genre. I would say the cult following BoCo has garnered over the years combines a respect for the original material as well as a resistance to the corporate minds who resolve to remain out of touch with the audience. Even if BoCo doesn't maintain a consistent protagonist role in much of the fanfiction out there, his presence and various roles in these works amounts to a characterological emancipation, a liberation from the oppression of authorial control that allows the patently imaginary person to speak as they will. These are themes we've been talking about since the first video. When fans are inspired by the passion of something, they are then motivated to use their own craft to channel their passions in spite of the corporation. They can then use their works to convey the themes and or messages that they think are important to get out there into the world. When indulging in works we love, I find it valuable to keep in mind the idea that Edward W. Said put forth called contrapuntal reading, where we as an audience must read canonical texts with an effort to draw out, extend, give emphasis and voice to what is silent or marginally present or ideologically represented in such works. I'm of the opinion that an author's work can and will transcend their intentions under the right conditions. This might seem like an argument for a death of the author case, but like I said in my first video, I don't think it's that cut and dry. BoCo's reference is simultaneously a testament to the world building of Wilbur Awdry as well as the admiration of a fandom. He shows that whatever an author may or may not have intended for something as little as a minor character can become something else entirely to the fans.
BoCo!
If you've made it this far, first of all, thank you for listening to me talk about BoCo the Diesel Engine from Thomas the Tank Engine for this long. I want this video to prove to you that BoCo is one of the greatest examples presented for the sticking power of the minor character. There are undoubtedly many reasons why a minor character can stand out and win over an audience, but I believe BoCo's appeal is his uncomplicated and resolute nature. Someone who acts as a firm pillar of the community and shows us what we can strive for in our own milieu. I'm sure Awdry didn't write BoCo with this intention of making him this life-altering figure that completely redefines the steam diesel dynamic in his entire world, since he appears about as much in the books as he does in the classic series. However, going back to the death of the author concept we discussed, fans will recontextualize characters and ideas no matter how small, because if the world is full enough, those who enjoy it will entertain themselves by exploring it thoroughly. With each of Awdry's characters, there is an individualism that echoes the way author E.M. Forster described his characters as ones full of the spirit of mutiny. He elaborates saying that if they are given complete freedom, they kick the book to pieces, and if they are kept too sternly in check, they revenge themselves by dying and destroy it by intestinal decay. This is the kind of relationship I hope all authors have with their characters, one where they treat their creations as their babies that they have to nurture. To me, this thought process warns authors and even artists in general not to constrict a character's identity for the sake of keeping the plot moving forward. Instead, letting your character act and exist naturally, and letting their decisions create the story, but still composing other elements in service of your greater meaning. I think why all of BoCo's appearances work is because, from what we know of him, he has no draw to conflict the same way James or Thomas do because of their egos.
Oh, please!
So trying to force him into the spotlight just might not make for anything engaging. Maybe the only way Awdry could implement him him was to make him a supporting cast member who does what he does best, help his community. And that works. That's who he is to Audrey, and that's fine. But that doesn't mean someone can't find a new angle for him, of course, and still bring the character in a new direction while staying true to those ideas. I think Forster's quote uses those two extremes to emphasize the fact that writing for characters takes a lot of nuance and understanding to make them seem believable. By balancing our ability to project and take on the personas of a character, or in a broader sense take on a new perspective, we are able to add deeper meaning to our own voice in storytelling or in art. I think the concept of minor character elaboration exemplifies the opportunity for creative ideas are all around us, even if it doesn't seem very clear to us at the moment. It's also crucial for reaffirming to us as people that every story matters, and there's value to be found in each creature, great and small. Minor character elaboration as a genre has become more popular in recent years because we're in an age of accessibility, where we have platforms like this one that almost anyone can use to connect with the rest of the world, and anyone can get their story out there. Whether or not it always works is not at all predictable, but the idea that the obscure can rise in prominence has reached a sort of stride in this time of instant access to everyone's little worlds. As for this genre, as Joseph R. Slaughter posits, genres emerge and become conventional, both publicly common and formerly regular, to the extent that they make collectively legible, if sometimes distorted, both actual and possible, desirable and undesirable social formations and relations. Even if it's not totally successful, there's a great emergence of stories and diversity reaching the mainstream nowadays because of people who believe those stories deserve to be told, and audiences receiving those stories by celebrating getting to see themselves out there or expanding their horizons. I find the beauty of minor character elaboration is that it defies the tendency of protagonist syndrome, not just for the sake of authors, but the audience. For this next part, I'd like to simply indulge in highlighting the other minor characters of the series who have been missed by fans for many years. The ones who, like BoCo, never found the return to the spotlight after a certain point in the show. The characters I discuss here I think all had more of a major role than BoCo ever did, but that's why I think it's interesting to look at them here, to see how other fan favorites look in comparison to BoCo. Maybe by looking at other minor characters in the world of Thomas, we can get a better understanding of what it means to be a minor character in this world. As for who the runner-up to BoCo is, as a fan favorite minor character, it's hard to choose just who would take second place. But I'm going to go with my gut here and say Duke the Lost Engine. Duke's story is an interesting one because, well, unlike BoCo, he actually has a story. He had a whole book about him in the Railway series, which basically equated to 4 stories in the show. After that, he just sort of disappeared. He might have gotten 1 or 2 cameos here and there before the big shift, but after his stories were through, he vanished. So let me pose this question. Is Duke a minor character if he got a whole book to himself? I mean, in the grand scheme of the show, sure, you could say no, but if we look at his stories, he's the central focus of them. I mean, he literally has a beginning, middle, and end. He works on an old railway, the railway shuts down, and he's locked away in a shed for years and years until he's found again.
Quite by accident. Excuse me.
Not to mention the dynamics he shares with Student Falcon during these stories and the greater history of the island we learned through the sheer existence of these tales. Duke's book is not just some minor appearance in service of another character, it is its own fully fleshed out story with Duke sharing the role of the protagonist with the other two. While the stories of Sodor go on after this book, I think it still means a lot to us because there are really memorable stories here. Heck, several people own a picture of Duke on their walls in the show. Duke is one of the many stories we get to see on this island that adds to the lore and slice of life material this series sets out to illustrate. Not only is he memorable for his personality and actions, but by showcasing another point in time for Sodor and thus another avenue for our imaginations to explore. The second character I'd like to mention will probably make you understand why I couldn't choose just who to talk about first, because they're both so beloved. Stepney the Bluebell Engine has made quite the impact on Sodor for a few reasons, but one that might be the most prominent is the fact that he is genuinely, matter of fact, a real engine. Thomas has always been rather fascinating in the way that the world and stories take place adjacent to real life. Not only are all of the engines themselves based off of real ones, but to take it a step further, famous engines from our own world will come and visit the island if not at least mentioned. This includes the Flying Scotsman, Sir Dave Churdo, Mallard, the list goes on. As one of these examples, Stepney stands out because not only does he exist in real life and in coming to Sodor bridges fiction and reality, but is actually the focus of several stories in the books and TV series, which is much more more than any of the other characters I listed. While he may not have the kind of story Duke got in his book, we still get to see his personality flourish as one who, like the audience, loves the island of Sodor and the escape it provides from the real world. Stepney mentions how he never gets the kind of long runs on his Heritage Railway as he does here, and jumps at the chance to pull trucks in the show, making him seem just grateful for the existence of Sodor and its freedoms. However, for the truly dedicated fans, there is another level of companionship to this character. And that is the real-life counterpart, of course. I mean, I could put it as simply as when you recognize a celebrity from a movie and have that moment of, wow, I know that guy. And I do think that contributes to the meaning-making, but personally, knowing that a real piece of culture has found life in fiction in such a unique way is so cool. I mean, how many shows can say they have made a character out of a real-life engine and that character meets theirs? It's kind of trippy when you think about it, but I feel like the celebrity status that the series brings to Stepney isn't like the ones the MCU or something brings to Tom Holland or one of these people, but it actually brings that character into our world that we escape to. Like I said for BoCo, knowing that character has connections to our fictional friends, our fictional family, makes us like them even more. Alright, for the last minor character I want to mention, I realize it's kind of an odd one. Not only is he not an Audrey original character, which is kind of breaking from the pattern here, but he also has been more of a mainstay in the show than a lot of characters, Audrey or otherwise. So, Salty the Dockside Diesel has slowly become one of the most recognizable characters in the show, making him one of the only minor characters who has really risen through the ranks. I mean, he is the dedicated engine for the docks, a location where a lot of stuff happens, new engines, special deliveries, etc. Not only this, but in his debut, he was the protagonist, and we really got to see just how much he was born to be a dockside diesel. Afterwards, he would show up several times in the season and in the following ones, well until the CGI series that explored other sides of his character too. I find Salty an interesting case for minor characters, since he could have easily fallen to the sidelines like any other, but I think his character is unique and maybe even quirky enough that it was easier to find use for the writers. He's basically a pirate caricature who tells all sorts of weird stories, sings sea shanties, and has a funny voice. Sounds perfect for a kid's show. I'd like to put forth a question though, that may have been asked already, let me know. But is Salty a sort of replacement for BoCo? I mean, among many things, he acts as the good diesel representative in some cases, albeit it isn't really the focus of his character. He's always willing to help a friend and bring others down a peg like we see in Gordon Takes a Tumble, so it's something to consider. But if I'm being honest, I don't really believe this at all. Both of these characters were introduced in two very different eras of the franchise. While both do a good job showcasing the good side of diesels, I think for Salty, that aspect comes as more of a secondary trait, whereas BoCo I find to be more a special case. I mean, he was the first one, the first outwardly kind diesel in the season where we were getting introduced to the very concept of diesels and dieselization. He represents the breaking of expectations, defying the prejudice the engines as well as the audience may have had at that point for diesels as a whole. Why I think Salty stuck around more than BoCo is because of his marketability, in lack of a better term. In a time where the show began to simplify characters and writing, Salty exemplifies that direction entirely. Though that's not to say that's any detriment to him. While he may be kind of silly and goofy, more than anything else, he's fun and distinct. No matter who the narrator is, all they have to do is put on a pirate accent and it feels correct for him. I think BoCo just couldn't fulfill this new goal the show had in mind because he's a gentler soul at heart. He doesn't have any one defining trait to drive at full throttle. He just is what he is. But honestly, that's kind of why I love him now. All those years ago, I just couldn't wrap my head around what the big deal was. And while I'm sure most people said it for the sake of preserving Audrey's work or their own childhood, I've come to love this character because I found that he's just wholesome. Like he has no problem with who he is and lives a life of peace. He's like the Thomas equivalent of the guy who goes to live in the woods and finds inner peace or whatever because he's just satisfied with himself. After all this time, I never would have expected to reach a conclusion like this for a character seemingly so small in this massive franchise. I mean, there are so many characters who have done so much and so many more who appear maybe once ever. So it's really fascinating to me that BoCo is the one who really changed my whole thinking on the very idea of what a minor character is and could be. BoCo represents a fundamental aspect of the world of Thomas, one of helping your community and rejecting stereotypes for the sake of a better collective experience. His erasure from the franchise infringes upon the cherished connections fans made growing up, since the island of Sodor gives the feeling of being one big family. without ever having to say it. For us as viewers, that world we see ourselves in being erased or rewritten can hurt in the same way losing real friends can. So losing one friend who completes that family portrait just doesn't feel right. While I think that the memes out there of BoCo may come from this place of irony, placing something that is known for being little known in the spotlight can be funny in a subversive way, but in order to even make those memes, that must require some knowledge of the series to the extent of knowing what is considered an obscure character. So I would say the irony that may be on the surface only displays the love they have for the world itself. We talked about minor character elaboration and the power of boosting other perspectives in fiction and life, and I think BoCo represents the power a fandom has in being able to direct what is or isn't given emphasis in the public sphere. BoCo's case also shows that what's important in minor character elaboration is understanding the world you are exploring. What part of that world does that character inhabit and represent? It also shows us that in order to elaborate on that character, you need to balance the individual identity they have with yours, as well as what message you want them to be the vehicle for. And finally, what I have personally learned from talking and thinking about BoCo more than any healthy human on earth is that you don't need the spotlight to be a fully realized version of yourself. And you can be completely comfortable in your own body when you neglect others' needs to put a label on you while putting your best foot or wheel forward in your community. Now, maybe I'm getting a bit heavy here, but hey, this is what Thomas does to me. Okay, I think I'm ready to stop talking about BoCo now. Thank you all for watching, and honestly, if you made it this far, I can't express enough how much it means to me. If you enjoyed all of this, consider leaving a like or subscribing. I mean, you might as well at this point. Also, please tell me what you think down in the comments. The discussions we have here are always so enlightening. Thanks again, everyone.